Well, hello everyone. We're continuing into our second segment of visual analysis in our introductory portion of the arts and culture of Asia. So welcome back. We ended our last segment when we were looking at non-objective art as we considered the way in which a work of art refers to something in the known or world, a figure or a landscape, or does it have no referent? And we ended with non-objective art as an example of art which has no reference in the living world. So go back and review the end of that lecture if that's not making sense to you. We're moving now back into questions of representation and the three-dimensional world on a two-dimensional surface. Let me share my screen here with you. All right, and then voila. Okay, lovely. All right. So pictorial space and the picture plane. An important concern up until the last century in European traditions of visual art was to create an illusion of three dimensions. We call that a pictorial space on a two-dimensional surface. We call that the picture plane. Here is a nice illustration of the picture plane. A European an artist in the European tradition contemplating that picture plane not as an opaque surface upon which he would paint, but as a clear window upon which he would create a representation of an illusion of reality or a representation of a three-dimensional world. And we understand that, as I said, and it's written as well as perspective. While Asian art influenced European art, and European art certainly influenced Asia and Asian artistic developments, we can, to some degree, we can generalize that European traditions until the modern and contemporary periods devoted a significant amount of attention to creating an illusion of three dimensions on a two-dimensional picture plane, sort of in a muted background. Here I have put Botticelli. He's much more vibrant when he's not muted, as he is in this slide. Painting from 15th century Florence, where we can see a strong recession of space and even another window within the window that is the three-dimensional pictorial world that Botticelli is seeking to create on a two-dimensional surface. I'm making such an emphasis upon this because it's so important so that we can really honor and appreciate a different conceptualization of the picture plane and representation in the Asian tradition. So one final example to help you understand what I'm trying to convey to you is a comparison between the Taoist painting Seeking the Tao in the Autumn Mountains. This is an ink painting on silk. And this painting by Leonardo da Vinci, The Madonna of the Rocks. I chose these two because there are some lovely complementary echoes between the two, but there's no connection between them in terms of the history of art. But there are some formal connections that I see subjectively, and you may too. So what I invite you to do as we look at this painting to the left and to the right is to think if these were actual, if in fact these, what we're seeing are glass, this is clear glass window and this is a clear glass window, and what's behind is actually something three-dimensional. Just try to imagine that. Then ask yourself, how far away is the objects behind that glass? Does it seem very close to the surface of the glass or far away? And so I think that the answer you will find is that in the Leonardo painting, there is a sense that these stones back here are a lot further away from us if we were to continue imagining we are looking through a window and not at a painting than the stone structures in Seeking the Tao in the Autumn Mountains. Even though this is monumental And the details tell us this is a vast expression of nature and humanity's small relationship to it. The way that massive, powerful presence of nature and humans' part in it, small part, is expressed very differently in a visual aesthetic in Chinese painting. So enough said, I think, to this point, but we are entering into a world of and an aesthetic that we need to be very sensitive to, and to not inadvertently draw comparisons to any traditions of representation that at least to some of you may be more familiar in European traditions of art making. Now, to the focus of this visual analysis, I've chosen this example of a Japanese painting. These are 4 panels to do some visual analysis exercises together. So let us begin. First, just look at this. Ask yourself, what are you seeing? Hopefully you see something that looks like a tree, an old tree. And then here maybe rocks. And then I think this is pretty clearly a flower. Flowers on a shrub. These forms here are part of the hardware of these sliding doors. So this is not part of the painting. So we're going to now proceed to a formal analysis. The formal analysis is the visual analysis of a work of art without reference to its content. We already have begun doing that a little bit in the discussion of perspective. Here are the elements of formal analysis: line, shape, color, value, texture, composition, and perspective. We'll go through each of these in succession to illustrate. Line is a mark on a surface. It may be continuous or broken. When you scribble, you're making lines. They are used to create patterns or textures. They may imply 3 dimensions, or they may direct our eye to certain kinds of movement and create a sense of movement in a work of art. So if we were all together, I would ask you, where do you see lines in this picture of a tree, an old tree? And I have arrows here to sort of call your attention to different ways in which line is used. See 1, 2, 3, 4 lines here, creating a sense of a curving upward movement of this tree. And then we see little vertical lines relative to the angle of this big trunk that suggests something is growing off of it and it's repeating. We can see repeating patterns, or at least harmonious patterns of thin branches, horizontal lines running across the surface of these flatter rocks, and we could go on. That is one, using line in formal analysis is one part of formal analysis. Here's a detail to show you how, if you were writing a paper and you could talk about how these rocks are made to appear old and with depth, you could talk about these repeating vertical lines, create a sense of the structure of these rocks as being composed of like sheets of stone. We know that rocks are all different, have different kinds of geological structures in them. And similarly, when we think about wood, in fact, this is not, let's just go back. So here, I believe this is rock. And then this is wood, but there is some similarities, of course. But the lines are different between the 2 forms, and one could talk about that in formal analysis. Shape is an area with an identifiable boundary. Shapes may be organic, based on natural forms, rounded and irregular, or they may be geometric, based on measured forms. So again, if we were together in this class, I'd ask you, what kind of shapes do you see? Well, I see an organic shape of a big trunk. I see 2 organic shapes here. Maybe this shape seems to perhaps balance this shape. And then this, we could talk a lot about the different dominant shapes that make up the overall arrangement of form on this picture and what effect that has on our eye. Where does it lead our eye? What does it cause us to focus on? I bring in depart from the Japanese painting for a moment to emphasize a very nice example of how geometric shape is used in Islamic representation. Here we're looking at the sacred Quran, an illuminated folio page from Baghdad. It's from 706 AD, which we also refer to in this class as Common Era, CE. And this AH is the Islamic reference to time and their new and Islam's new year, and AD 1306 to 7 is the Common Era time. So I apologize, I wasn't clear there at all. But for our purposes, this is a 14th century Quran in the non-Islamic, non-Arabic way of keeping time, but here is the alternative. So in the Islamic aesthetic tradition, we see many repeating geometric shapes and forms. It's a leitmotif of Islamic art and aesthetics. And we would talk a lot about why this is, how it relates to the Islamic faith's view of representation, and also perhaps the way in which a prayer and devotional life is influenced by these almost very trance-like repeating forms to take us in, to lead into a particular state of meditative prayer. And so these would be ways in which we could talk about shape and to some degree line, informing the aesthetic of Islamic art. And it would be very useful, and we would really need that vocabulary to talk intelligently and correctly about what we're seeing here. These are not organic at all. They are geometric, so quite different than our plum blossom, our old plum tree. I call your attention here to line in the background of the picture. And this is gold leaf, and it's forming a series, it's not line shape, it's forming a series of squares. And whether that was an intentional effect on the part of the artist or a consequence of the medium, I'm not sure, but this is something one could research because it does produce an evenness and a repetition of form in the picture as a whole. Color. Color is the sensation produced by various wavelengths of light, also called hue. I have a prism here that shows us how light, when passed through a prism, is separated into the colors on the spectrum that the human eye can see. There are many other colors, but our eyes cannot see them, like infrared being an example, infrared rays. Here are some useful tools that are coming out, in fact, out of Western art historical theory, the color wheel to help us think about color, and I think it's useful. So analogous color is color that is similar. So we can see similarity between yellow, yellow, orange, and orange. They all, they're next to each other and they share some of the, a little bit of the dominant color. So yellow, and over here we turn to red. So in here they're sharing a little yellow and a little of the dominant red. And so these are moving analogously between shades of yellows or analogously shades of oranges to red. Complementary colors are when two colors, when set side by side, become more intense. And that's a technique of painting that can be intuitive on the part of artists or intentional. And in Europe, there was a discovery, or this theory became known, and artists were very intentional, but we can look at a lot of art and see, without knowing the theory, an intuitive method of painting that recognizes this. Monochromatic is when it's all of the same hue with different degrees of saturation. And it could be made lighter with water if it's water soluble, or with a white paint to make it lighter, but it is monochromatic. There is no other color mixed with it than and only a level of saturation. So I invite you to look at this picture and think about, how does color relate to it? Is it monochromatic? Is it do you see analogous colors? Do you see complementary colors? And you can pause the video and think about that and come to a conclusion. And if you're confused, just go back and look at the description of colors that I've provided here. Here's a detail of a flowering plant, and we can see reds and greens here, which do complement one another. Value is the degree of lightness or darkness of an area of color. So it's measured between black and white. The lighter the color, the higher the value, the darker, the lower the value. Okay, so we're going to stop this segment here, and I will see you very soon as we continue our discussion of formal analysis in works of art. I'll see you soon.